Wow. All right. So, welcome to the Integrated Resources Institute Informational Interview Program, All About Jobs. Today we're talking with Art Good, an award-winning radio host, and so many other things that we're going to hear about today. We have a lot of people on the line, and people are continuing to join the call. We welcome your questions. We want to make it more of a discussion. If you have a question, you can type it into the chat, or you can ask your question in between the answers to the other questions. The session is being recorded, so for the sake of audio quality, please mute your audio now. I'm going to do the same. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Janet. Janet Murr is our interviewer today. She is a coach extraordinaire. All right, take it away, Janet.
Hello, welcome everyone. I'm glad that you are here. I'm looking forward to interviewing Art. And I first just wanted to say, for those of you that don't know, I have known Art Good for over 30 years. I worked at a radio station in San Diego with him called KIFM, a jazz radio station. So he's been a good friend for a long time. I'm looking forward to this. So the first question I have is, you've been described as a radio host, and I want to know, is a radio host the same as a radio DJ?
Now, in my notation, I said host is kind of a little bit more of a glorified name, but as you were asking the question, a DJ is kind of more like someone who plays music, talks between music. I would say a radio host is more someone who talks more, maybe takes phone calls, or morning drive is much more of a host, because you're doing something besides just saying, here's David Sanborn, or that was Peter White. So I think that's the difference between a DJ is a little bit more music oriented. A host is like, let's talk about the world.
I would definitely call you a host then. So you've experienced definitely in both traditional and online radio. Compare them for us. Let us know kind of what the difference is.
Well, online's easier. I mean, everything I do, I haven't done live radio since we were working together in San Diego, but traditional radio was huge. It's kind of interesting. I mean, I don't listen to basic radio anymore. Everything I listen to is online, but the audience is smaller when you're online. Back in the days of KIFM in San Diego, we had thousands of people listening to us. There's a station that got me interested in radio when I was in college called KNX-FM in Los Angeles. And somebody restructured it online now, which is fabulous. But the guy who originally did it said, he looks at how many people are listening to their KNX-FM online now. It's like 200, 300, 400. He said back in the days of KNX-FM in Los Angeles, it was 100,000, 400,000, 500,000. So it's relative, but online's much, much easier. Just upload the show.
I can see that. So describe a typical day as a radio host. Typical day now for you, Art.
Now or then?
Now.
I got up and walked around the wash for an hour this morning, but I mean, back in those days, it was much more, I'll just give a brief. In those days.
You know what? Let's do this. Start a typical day then, and then do a typical day now.
Well, back in those days, in the KIFM days, originally, before you got there, I was the morning drive announcer. So I would get up at 5 in the morning and be at the radio station by 5:45, barely awake, do a 3-hour shift, I think, be on the air live. And that was more like being a DJ, play the music, introduce the weather guy, the news guy, the traffic person, come up there at 9 o'clock and then do, I forgot about this for you. We do radio commercials for you guys, for the salespeople for 3 hours. Go in and create radio commercials or voice, whatever the assignment was. And then you'd be done by noon, and people would say, we're done by noon, and go, well, I get up at 5 o'clock. It's like the people who host the Today Show, they're in bed by 6 p.m. Now, of course, in our days, I was always hosting something at night too. That's a different story. Now, when you work on your own, I've got a syndicated show to put together once a week, so I've got a pattern with that. And even though the JazzTrax festival that I produced was not able to be held this year because of the pandemic, I still work on it every day. So when you work at home, a lot of people have learned how to work at home this year, right? A lot of people with the quarantine and the pandemic are having to go through learning what a lot of us learned a long time ago, including you, how to work from home, how to structure your life without a boss being on top of you all the time. That help?
Yeah, definitely. I can see, I would like at home and online better than, well, both have its benefits, but yeah, and we had fun in the day, but I can see how at home would be a lot, it's easier to pivot and a lot easier to do the work at home.
We spent too much time in the lunchroom, coffee room, and at home, you don't have that interruption of wanting to talk to the other. I still remember all the conversations we had. We got our work done, but we also had a lot of conversations with the people in the workplace.
And the community
Yeah.
as well. Yeah.
Home, you can be a little bit more focused.
So let me ask you this. What do you like most about being a radio host?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. It's what I do. So I don't think, I don't sit around enough and appreciate. Well, just recently, because maybe this will answer the question, because of the pandemic, what I do makes no money this year, which is the Catalina Island JazzTrax Festival. No income. It's the first time in my life I've never had no income. It's okay. I'm okay. I planned well for this point in life, but I asked my streaming audience for the radio show, and I was very reluctant to do this because I've never done this in my life before, if they would contribute to a GoFundMe for the syndicated show to pay for the hard costs of streaming. Well, they did. It doesn't take much, maybe $300 a month, maybe $500 a month. And they have come through with that. But they also, on GoFundMe, you can write to the person, you can put a note in. And so I'm getting feedback I wouldn't normally get. And the notes from the listeners have been terrific. They like my show.
Oh.
I have a question. So you've mentioned a lot of terms. Can you describe what is syndication?
Syndication is when you take your radio show that you do locally and you take it across the country. And my show happens to be represented by different United Stations Radio Network in New York. So when I don't do a local show anymore, I only do syndication. So it's a 5-hour show. I go because of the internet online. I hit the button, click it, it uploads to wherever it goes, to a server somewhere. And then radio stations around the country who take
Mm-hmm. So, Art, when you're moving backwards, we can't hear you. So, stay forward if you could, please, because some of that dropped out, and it's gold. We want to hear everything you've got to say. So, thank you. That's really interesting. And what is a hard cost?
Cost is what you pay to stream the show. You're on a server to get the show out there. You have to pay. I actually pay a company in San Francisco a month to have whatever it is. I don't know how to do it. They have a show all over the world, actually.
Right. Right.
In the original days of syndication, I had to mail so online is obviously much easier.
Right. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Janet.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thanks for the information on those terms. I thought of a couple things when you were talking, Art. One of them is that when you're a radio host, you don't see your audience and you don't get feedback from your audience. Some of the radio hosts get call-ins, but they get call-ins when they're, call in to be the 8th caller to win something. And, if you're a talk show sometimes, but if you're a news program, you can have guests there. But you said that one of your favorite things is happening now when you get feedback from people, and you said they like me. And I don't know, people probably don't know this, but I had the pleasure of doing events with Art over the years. And events are when you have a jazz artist come in and they do a concert, and then you have a host, and then or you do a series of concerts, and the host is the person that comes in and does the announcing. And there were people that came and all they wanted to do was meet Art. They would come and say, where is he? And then when they met him, their eyes would light up. So I don't think Art realizes what he has a Wikipedia page, what a personality he is. So the feedback, I like it that you got the feedback, and there's people, the information on the Wikipedia page says that Art is the person that created and developed and started smooth jazz. across the country. So it's really neat what you have done. And it's neat that also that you have introduced so many new artists in that format. There's artists that have been up and coming, and they would not be where they are if Art hadn't started playing them on his radio show. And now they're, you know, famous, and they wouldn't have been where they are if it wasn't for Art. And I mean, I think that's amazing, but you don't get that feedback. And so being behind the microphone, you do your show every day, day in and day out, but you're sitting in, you know, your office space.
I was telling Wendy that that when the show used to be on a lot more stations, it was on in San Francisco, on KKSF in San Francisco, and I would literally sit here in Palm Springs on Saturday nights between 7 and midnight and listen to my show in San Francisco, and I would think that people were driving across the Golden Gate Bridge listening to my show, and that helped me with the perspective, because you're right. I sit here, I actually produce the show on computer now. Used to have a big studio, but now it's just a computer. And I look out on the golf course here in Palm Springs, and I don't, like you said, you don't see a listener. Every now and then I'll get a letter, or rarely, or at the Jazz Festival, I'll meet somebody who listens from, say, Rochester, New York, and you keep that in your head. For the next few shows, you're like broadcasting to that one person in Rochester, New York.
That goes to my next question. I think you answered it. It's the biggest reward you feel for doing your job. So let me get to the next question. If you could change one thing about the work of being a radio host, what would that be?
Well, my notation was back to when I was the morning drive at KIFM. I said, better coffee when I arrived at the station at 6 a.m. because Starbucks wasn't really big at that point in time. I'm not sure that I would change much, because I think as you go through the struggle of a career and the struggle of a business, which everybody does. My son is 21 and good friends with Janet's daughter. I've got a picture of me holding them both as babies. You leave college with so much optimism, which is important. But I'm teaching my son that no matter what, it's still going to be a struggle. Even if you have a great career, it's going to be a struggle. So, and I'm just reading a book where the guy's saying he make mistakes, because you're not going to learn about how to improve it unless you make the mistakes. But I say, well, I would go back and I would do it differently. Well, maybe I wouldn't have. So maybe you just have to enjoy the fact that you have a job and you're getting through it. And then when people tell you did a good job, you know you did a good job.
When did this happen? When did you get this like perspective, Art? I like that. I like that response. So let me ask you this. Did you choose this career, or would you say that it chose you?
I'll give you a funny answer. I went to college to be a minister. And in college, I worked in a mortuary.
Did you say minister? Get out of town.
Minister. I went to college to be a minister. And remember the part I said I had a job in a mortuary. So who knows where things are going to lead you. But I got interested in radio by listening to the station I mentioned previously, KNX-FM. They were phenomenal. FM in kind of the 60s, early 70s. FM was evolving from elevator music to rock and roll and, popular music, which I didn't think was legal at the time. But the station in LA was so phenomenal. It was the FM to KNX News Radio. It was the CBS FM station in Los Angeles. And they had the most incredible jingle package, and the presentation was conversational. And I developed most of my style listening to that radio station in LA going to college. I almost felt like listening to LA radio and LA television. Tom Brokaw was the 11 o'clock anchor when I was in college on Channel 4, listening to these guys and their presentation and the evolution of broadcasting, I thought was my college education. So I guess that's what led me into the career, and I just took it from there. I really wanted to work at KNX-FM. I know the program director now of KNX-FM. I actually knew him back at that point in time. And he told me back then that I was going to be his next hire at my glorified radio station, KNX-FM in Los Angeles.
Oh my goodness.
But he went to writing for TV. And so he didn't hire me. And I told my son a few weeks ago, I said, oh, what I would give him to have worked for KNX-FM. But you know what? If they'd hired me, I would have gone down that road instead of the road where we met creating smooth jazz, and there would be no Catalina Island JazzTrax Festival.
I'm so glad they didn't. It's a great station, though. I'm so
You
glad
gotta,
they.
you gotta follow the road that's not only you create, but the one that's in front of you.
That goes back to your point. Yeah. So this the next question kind of leads from that. It seems like your career grew by you following the ideas from one to the next. Some of the favorite parts of that process?
Well, it took me decades to realize that I was less a radio person and I was more a promoter. I used to, I was in radio forever, and I still am to a degree. But then I started the JazzTrax Festival back in 1987, and I would always tell people when they'd ask, "What do you do?" I say, "I'm in radio, but I also do this jazz festival." It eventually flipped, and I said, "I produce a JazzTrax Festival." Oh, I'm in radio too. So, what was the question?
Yeah, you know what? You answered it, because favorite part of the process. And I think what you're saying is, along the way, you figured out, instead of being a radio host, you're a promoter that does radio.
Right, and that's where the road took me to.
Yeah.
But all in all, my favorite part of a job is when you get something accomplished. My favorite point of the year is the day after the Catalina Island JazzTrax Festival is done.
And I don't think that the people that are on this call know about what the Catalina Jazz Festival is. So in a nutshell, can you kind of describe or tell them what it is? I've been there every year for as long as I can remember, but it's amazing. So maybe just let them know a little bit about it.
Well, when I started the syndicated show, it put me on the airwaves across America, so I was able to create a jazz festival in a unique location, Catalina Island, just off of Los Angeles, and be able to advertise it for free on my syndicated show. And it grew and it grew, and at some point in time it became legendary, and it became just what I do all year long. And people laugh and they go, "So you," well, I have to cut that part out. It was about when I was, in front of a divorce court judge one time, and he said, "What do you do?" And I said, "This festival." He says, "So you arrive on the island on Friday?" And it was 3 weekends at that point in time. And he said, "Then you leave 2 weeks later and you're done. That's what you do." And you can't explain to a judge the facts of life. And oh yeah, on Friday it starts, and all these people from all across America just show up out of nowhere. And the artists, it's amazing. They just all decide to take boats and come over, and there just happens to be sound and lights sitting there, and yeah. And then 2 weeks later, "I'm done, Your Honor." It's such an easy job. No, anybody who throws an event, this, if you throw an event, whether it's a 4th of July parade, whether it's a jazz festival, whether it's an inauguration. I read this morning that they're already starting to build the platform for the presidential inauguration in January. It's November. Anytime something's happening that's big on this day, somebody was working on it all year long. So
yeah. And how many years? What would be you have to skip this year because of COVID, but next year, what will be the year anniversary?
34th.
34 years.
That's 1987 then.
And how many artists play over the weekend usually?
About 25. And
25.
The great thing about maybe one of the things I am most proud of, you pointed out earlier, was the artists that we've discovered.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the superstars now were unknowns when we booked them originally, but I somehow built an event that people expect to be introduced to people that they didn't know anything about before we booked them. And it doesn't always work. It's kind of fun. Too.
So I have a question. How do you just determine which artists do they send you samples of their music, or do you just pick them out from what you've heard on the radio? How do you determine that?
First off, Wendy, I have on my email every day artists that are sending me songs and this and that, and they want airplay. And you kind of feel bad because you can't listen to everything. You just, after all these years, you have a certain amount of feel for what you can hear. I know the charts, I know the artists, I know everything's coming out. And at this point in time, after 30, when did we start Lights Out? 82, almost 40 years, you just have an innate feel, you still have to pay attention. That's one of the reasons why I keep doing the radio show. The radio show does not make any money anymore. And people go, well, why do you still do it? I go, well, it keeps me so up to date. It's what I do, for one thing. You do what you do. And but when I book the festival, I book a much better festival because every week I produce a 5-hour radio show. I don't know any other promoter who does it that way, but it just happens to be the way that I do it. And I have to have somebody on the lineup. Janet knows this. Every year, there has to be somebody on the Catalina Island JazzTrax Festival lineup who I had never even heard of when the year began. Literally. I mean,
definitely, yeah. How did the idea for the JazzTrax Festival start?
It came from what KIFM. We created a Humphrey's Conscious by the Bay series in San Diego, and it became extremely successful. Still is, except that back in those days it was all contemporary jazz, and now they have maybe one or two. But I worked my tail off for that and for the radio station, and was making no extra money, just tagged on to all the other stuff I was doing. And you know, if you have a certain mentality of wanting to do more, like everybody wants to have a syndicated radio show up there on radio. Well, I pulled it off, but that wasn't easy. A lot of people want to have a festival. Got a jazz festival and pulled it off. It didn't make any money for 10 years. So wow. It's not part of anything, any job, venture is persistence. And I think persistence is the only reason why that festival will hopefully continue post-COVID next year. In anything, any business, anything, there's one person who's persistent and stayed persistent. I see a hand up.
Wow, that's fantastic. That I like the 10 years. I mean, that's definitely sticking with it. And now, I mean, look at it now. So a little bit back step. I know you were a program director as well. What is a program director, and how do you compare that? I know a lot of people they see it as a position, a step up from radio host, and then they see it as a promotion, and then they never go back. Why didn't you stay as a program director?
That's another one of the things that people get into radio. Everyone dreams of being a program director. And I wished my days as program director had lasted longer, but I was stepping into the smooth jazz world and the syndicated world and hosting everything. And our boss at the time kind of gave me an ultimatum of you can cut back on one thing or another. And the one thing I decided to cut back on was program director. Program director wasn't going to take me anywhere, and I didn't know this at the time. But being a program director wasn't going to take me to the dimensions I went to, but doing the other things were. And being a program director is kind of like being a coach of a team. If you've got a good owner and you can do what you want, you're in great shape. But you might have an owner that tells you what to do, and then you're not really a program director.
And what does just so for people who don't know, what is a program director? Like, what would be a definition of what they do?
They're supposed to be in charge of the station, not the sales staff. You've got your own sales manager, but the program director picks the music, has a music director that picks the tone of the station. And that's one of the problems I had with radio, is it kind of got bastardized later on, that you couldn't be that creative. With this guy at KNX-FM that started the mellow rock format in LA, he got to start with a screen of a blank board. And he created and then it only lasted for 10 years, because the more successful a radio station becomes, KIFM did the same thing, the more restrictive it becomes. Oh, we're so successful, we can't take the chances we did when nobody knew who we were. So sometimes you got to get away from the corporate world and go do your own thing. Because what I do on Catalina Island with the JazzTrax Festival, I'd never be able to do if I had to do it, somebody told me I had to do it. But you can't get that freedom at first. You got to work towards that freedom.
Can you give us an example of some of a freedom action, when you were doing the festival? What is an example of that?
Some of the bombs that we've had at the festival. I mean, like I said, everyone looks at the lineup. They want to see the big names. I'm right now trying to get Average White Band for next year at the festival. They want to see the big names. but they know that the lead-in bands are going to be good, and they want to see a few names, at least one or two. It's got a little hard. Well, actually, it hasn't gotten harder. Even though the demographics gotten older, everyone who's young still wants to be a musician, and they want their music to be heard. So when I pick, well, I'll give you a great example. Jesse Cook is now one of the more famous flamenco guitarists in America and Canada. And I gave him his US debut in 1995 on a side stage down in the Marine Room Bar, and people went nuts. They'd never heard of him before. And then he became
I have a question.
Another artist was a guy named Douglas Spotted Eagle, and he was a total bomb. But you try, and people actually enjoyed the bombs, the ones that didn't work out. They'd come up to me sometimes in the middle of a performance. We had a singer, I don't want to name her, but a couple of years ago, and somebody was walking up to me saying, "Do you know how painful this is? She's terrible." I went, "Of course I know."
I see that someone has a question, Art. So 1 second.
Gosh, I hate to be selfish, but I need to leave, and I wanted to thank Art. But Art, I love Small World Stories. I've enjoyed your presentation. Have you heard of the Pete Douglas Beach House in Half Moon Bay? You have, right?
Yeah.
Bach Dancing and Dynamite Society. I saw Cal Jader there in the very early 70s.
Wow.
Really a cool place.
Right.
Yeah, but
hopefully we'll get back to live music in places like that soon.
Incredible. It was incredible. That was an incredible experience. I love Half Moon Bay. It's pretty much unchanged. I went through there about two or 3 years ago. But Art, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And
Anytime.
I'm sorry that I have to leave. I'll see everyone.
Thanks.
Bye, Joseph. And Tiffany has a question. Tiffany
Hi,
is
Joseph.
7, Janet, just so you know. Yeah. So
What you like on the radio?
Repeat that, Tiffany. What was your question?
What you like on the radio?
What do you like about the radio? What do you like about working on the radio?
Well, music primarily, although radio's gotten to be where, the funny thing is when I'm in the car, I don't listen to anything but news on the radio. I mean, we're old enough to remember when news radio came about. Right? News around the clock, 24 hours a day. And now you've got talk radio, but most people, radio means music.
That's so funny you say that. I don't listen to any music on the radio. And the reason why is because I worked in radio sales for so long that when I listen to music, all I hear is the radio ads, and my mind still goes to who has that advertising and who's selling it. And so I think about work. So I only listen to news talk as well. So
But the funny thing is that I prefer silence. I don't have music on. That my life is music, but you won't hear music much in my house. I listen to it when I want to listen to it. When I'm out for my hour walk every day, I'd say 4/5 of the time, I just want silence. I want to hear the wind. But then that moment comes, you want to hear the Moody Blues.
yeah. So I have a question. At the height of KIFM, the smooth jazz, I know you started with the program at night. I think it was, I know it was called Lights Out San Diego, and you took a big risk there. Tell us a little bit about what it was like to start and run that evening program, and how that became, how you started that.
Well, I was the program director of KIFM. I was the morning drive announcer. And one day the general manager, Bruce Walton, and I were out for lunch at the old PB Cafe on trade. And he said, we got a few problems with our ownership and they won't spend any money. And have you ever thought about doing a late night jazz show? Literally, that's what he said. And I said, well, I came out of Portland, Oregon, where there was a late night show called Lights Out. He said, I said, you want me to do it? He said, yeah. This was a Thursday at lunch in March of 1982. I said, when would you like me to start it? He said, how about tonight? I said, Bruce, I don't know anything about jazz. How about next Tuesday? So over the course of that weekend, I'd been in radio at that point in time for 7 years or so. I've been the program director, so all the records, all those vinyl records came to me. I should have put the vinyl records behind me for the show. I went through my vinyl records, just trying to figure out what was jazz, and that's why we didn't go in a traditional jazz fashion. I didn't know. I was a soft rock program, so I picked albums that they'd had a crossover hit, Grover Washington Jr., because he'd had Just the Two of Us radio hit, and Chuck Mangione, and I saw David Sanborn, who, for anybody who doesn't know, is one of the biggest saxophonists in the world, and I went, "Who's he?" I threw across the room. Oh, so when I picked the music, I picked it from a soft rock pop perspective, and that's why Lights Up came on the air as it did. And Bruce was afraid of the word jazz. He thought the word jazz was such a turnoff, he wouldn't call it Lights Out Jazz. We eventually all called it Lights Out Jazz, but that's why we called it Lights Out San Diego. And he was so scared of putting jazz onto a radio station. He wanted to be able to, you guys to go out and promote it, but he didn't want to scare anybody away from the actual airwaves. So we went on from 11 p.m. to midnight. And then he saw that something was happening, and it was becoming like a cult show or something, So he stretched it to 2 hours, 10:30 p.m. to 12:30 a.m. He wasn't even
because they saw the ratings, a spike in the ratings, because they have ratings for radio programs. So at that particular hour, they had this rating spike, and it showed that there were so many people listening to it.
But you wouldn't normally get a spike at 11 p.m. unless you were a sex talk radio show or something like that. So I was actually up in LA visiting CBS, probably to meet the guys at KNX-FM. And they introduced me to somebody in the sales department. He said, "What are you guys doing down there?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, you've got this very unusual spike of ratings at 11 p.m. And I went, "Oh." So I realized we had something. And then I actually, if you remember, I don't know if you were there yet, I left the station for a year, and to competitively do what they did. That's when our GM moved the show to 7 p.m. If I hadn't left the station, he would never been willing to do that. And then within a couple of years, the smooth jazz had become so popular that I think, were the first all contemporary, smooth jazz wasn't the name yet, all contemporary jazz station in the country, 24/7. And then we got followed by LA, the Wave in LA copied us, and we went right from there.
What was the LA station called again?
The Wave.
Oh, the Wave. Yeah. And then
they told me that they copied us in San Diego. They came down and copied what we were doing.
yeah.
So we came down there and took it back to LA.
And I remember, because I sold advertising, that the station became the number one, not the number one jazz station, but the number one radio station in San Diego.
All right. And we have a question from Karen. I don't know if that's how you say your name. Kate? Yeah? Okay.
Yeah. Hello.
Hi, you have a question.
Yes. How does this radio station work?
Oh, how does the radio station work?
Yes, Janet. Yes.
Well,
yes.
I'll give you an answer from the old days and then from the new days. In the old days, they literally had machines. We actually played records off vinyl records. We queued up the record.
Oh.
Yeah. The commercials were all on like 8 tracks. We put them in the machine, and then your voice would go up to a big tower.
Yeah.
And nowadays, the DJ could be live, could be on tape, but all the music is in a computer. It can be the size of your laptop, literally. And the sales department puts their commercials into that computer. The music's all put into that computer, and then somebody programs it and goes live.
Great question. Thank you. Okay, so this might be a little bit about what we just talked about, but you come across as someone who bravely goes after your next project. So many of us think of experiences that didn't go as we planned as lessons to learn from. So you told us a little bit about, you could have gone one direction and you went the other direction, and about the Jazz Festival, didn't make money for 10 years, and about KNX, you could have gone there. And I think really liked what you told us about the lesson that you're trying to teach your son. Expand on that a little bit more.
I'd like to say I was brave. I was actually scared to death. And I don't think that's a bad thing. When you were talking earlier, I think one of the most important things in anything is to have confidence. It doesn't mean you necessarily have it. I didn't have confidence, even though I was seemed to be brave. And I like to read biographies. I'm reading one on the guy that just retired as the head announcer of the Stanley Cup hockey finals, and reading about his start to his career. Most people have struggles. I mean, almost all of them do have struggles that starts the career. You're being brave by continuing, by persisting, and hopefully the confidence will come sooner than later. But you also have to be a little crazy.
So doing it even if you're scared.
Yeah, I was crazy to do a festival on an island 26 miles across the sea.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, totally crazy. I remember one of my best friends owned, Deacon Jones owned the Cafe Pacifica down in Old Town. He said, you're nuts, Art. Why, if you want to do a jazz festival on an island, do it over at the Hotel Del on Coronado Island. And he was right to a huge extent, because we had to pay to get chairs over to the island. There weren't even enough chairs to have people sit on for the festival. But you know what? Out of crazy ideas come fabulous things.
I remember thinking about how are you going to ship all of that equipment over, all of their speakers, all of their instruments. I mean, it's insane the way that you put it on. So, I mean, it's really a truly amazing. And if anyone wants to know a little bit more about it, when we're done, we can give you the website. So it's jazztrax.com, but we'll repeat it, because if you want to see what he does over there with the artists and JazzTrax and the festival. So I think we talked most about this, but I want to know a little bit about how common is it to interact with the personalities and the artists that you work with. I know that you play their music a lot, and I know that you know a lot of them pretty intimately, but how often do you talk with them face to face before COVID?
As little as possible.
I know that's not completely true.
It's not completely true. I mean, sometimes some of the biggest stars have egos. I learned a long time ago not to go backstage because artists are very needy. The biggest one, I'm the promoter, and they'll hit you with the silliest little thing. And I wonder something. We also did JazzTrax Christmas tours across America. So I traveled at Christmas time. JazzTrax was the first smooth jazz traveling Christmas show. Didn't make any money, but it was a lot of fun.
I remember.
But these artists, I remember Brian Culbertson is one of the biggest artists in the format now. And we were in Atlanta changing shuttles, and we weren't all together. We had 5. One of them was Chris Bodie, who's just become one of the most best-selling instrumentalists right now in the world. But I'd say don't get on that shuttle in the Atlanta airport. It's the biggest airport in the country. I don't know, the whole group's not here. And so Brian Culbertson stepped back out. Brian Culbertson is huge now. Then he stepped back in. I said, Brian, the whole group's not here yet. And I was like a travel agent, right? Basically. And finally, he stepped into the shuttle, and we didn't step in because the group wasn't together yet. And the shuttle took off. We didn't find him for 2 hours. And I just wondered, how do these guys, they play great music, but how do they know how to get around the world if they don't turn on the tour with a road manager? So musicians have a right brain, left brain, one or the other. And they have to be that way because it's what some people are so much smarter, and it's very subtle, but they come up with great music because they're kind of crazy. But no, I wouldn't want to be with them on Christmas Eve.
Yeah, I can't even picture you trying to do any of the details.
Yeah, it's best to not meet your hero.
So were you ever a musician yourself? I don't even know the answer to that.
Yeah, I played cello till I got interested in girls in 8th grade.
You did not.
Did. Played cello, and then I was first cello. Martha Lou Torrance was third cello, and I got a crush on her. Soon she was first cello, and I was third cello.
You really did? You played the cello?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so funny. I never knew that about you.
But rather than having interest in girls knock me out of music, I didn't know that that's why most guys get into music, rock bands.
yeah, the trumpet, is that the one that most, well, anyway, so you played the cello. That's interesting. So yeah, we talked about the jazz festival. So do you get much opportunity to talk to the people who are interested in a career in radio, whether that's traditional or online?
Not anymore, because I don't run into people who, it's not the most desirable thing to get into radio these days. Well, first off, I'm not that age.
Mhm.
And I asked Wendy if I should say this in the program, because I mean, this was your career, this was my career, but radio is it's so much more online now. If I was going to, I would, if my son wanted to go into radio, I would not discourage him from anything except that, because it's not what it was in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s. Once online came along, podcasts came along, uh, it all changed. And so if somebody said, I wanted to get into radio, I would say, how about getting into something social media wise? And I might not know how to guide them. So,
That might include like a radio component.
yeah, I mean, what is radio? Radio is communication.
Yeah.
A podcast, I still don't understand podcasts.
Well, what is a podcast? Do you know?
See?
Yeah.
You're asking me. Let's call Riley and Austin, because they can
Yeah, I
tell.
know. My daughter would know. So he had his son the same time I had my daughter. So they're 3 months apart in age. So they've known each other growing up. That's an interesting answer to that. So how would you describe the perfect person for radio, or in radio, or actually how would you describe the kind of qualities or skills a person would need to be in radio or to produce a music festival?
Okay, I got to separate those in terms of radio. And no matter what I just said about radio, I told Wendy earlier that I did visit KIFM a few years ago. Most phenomenal radio studio I've ever seen. What do they own? 3 stations, 4 stations. They're down by Jack Murphy Stadium. Modern as can be. How they keep going in this day and age, I don't know. But that's still there. Yeah. But in terms of promotions, I would try to latch on to somebody who's doing an event. A good example is the Dave Cause Cruise, most phenomenal thing on the planet. Scott Pedersen, who we worked with, was his stage director for the cruise forever, and had Kevin, forget Kevin's last name. Kevin was just kind of a tag along.
Kevin Crespo? Oh no, is he a salesperson?
Right. He's
anyway.
And Kevin was just kind of a tag along. He was just a young kid who latched on to Scott Pedersen, who created the Thornton Winery concert series. And then Scott pulled him into the Dave Cause Cruise setup. Scott left last year, and now Kevin is in charge of stage directing on this incredible cruise.
Wow.
He attached himself when he was really young to somebody that pulled him. And we all know that internships lead to the best careers imaginable. Every kid in college now wants an internship because they know that getting in is the key, and then you can work your way up. Also, having a mentor. You may be asking a question later about that. I never had a mentor, and I wish that I had. That always helps.
Yeah, I was going to, we can lead right into that. I was going to mention that because I really firmly believe in either an internship, or also I've heard a lot of temporary jobs become permanent jobs. So an internship is a great way to go. And also, just going to concerts and watching the people who put them on and introducing yourself to them. I think that might be a great way to find out about the business and see if it might be something you'd want to do, or doing maybe informational interviews. So did you have a mentor?
No. I got into radio and I thought I knew everything, and I knew nothing. And so even though I don't want my son to follow me in the career that I was in, I've told him, don't start thinking you know everything. You don't. It's better. Listen. It's just, there's so much you can learn. Don't get ahead of your skis in your career. Listen, learn, even for the people who are doing it wrong. You can learn so much from the people who are doing it wrong, and figure out how to do it the right way. But when I read these, I love biographies, and most everybody has a mentor, and I'm kind of disappointed. If I had a mentor, it would have been the program director at KNXFM.
It's not too late.
I'm having lunch with him in December up in Vancouver, Washington.
See, it's not too late.
It looks like Tiffany has another question. Is it your hand?
Go ahead.
What music do you listen to?
What you mean? What station does he listen to?
Yes.
Art?
Apple Music.
Oh,
Actually, I listen to Sirius XM satellite radio in the car because I'm a news junkie. But in terms of music, I actually pay a monthly $3.99 to Pandora and very rarely use it. I'll do that occasionally because they'll program. My son loves Spotify. Riley probably loves Spotify. But Apple Music, $14.99 a month, and you can have access to almost every single song. It's amazing. That's why radio, it's like, why do you want to, I know you made a lot of money in sales, Janet, but why do you want to listen to all these commercials when you can pay $14.99 a month and program your own station? You could even pretend you're the DJ.
everything is changing so much. That's for sure.
Changed.
It has changed, yeah. So what advice would you give somebody who loves music and who would love to get into the business? I think you might have answered that in terms of getting an internship or, going to a festival or learning more about the business, but any other advice you would give someone?
I think you said it right there. My internship in college showed me what I shouldn't do. I was an intern at Pasadena First Nazarene Church. And one night I was walking through a field near Disneyland at my roommate's house in Anaheim and just looking at the sky going, what am I doing? I don't fit in working in a church. And I had this epiphany. I didn't hear a voice. I should change the story. I heard this great voice. The epiphany was, you don't have to be a minister. And I'd been listening to KNXFM and I went, I could go into radio. So I called the youth minister at Pasadena, big church, Pasadena First Nazarene Church the next day. And I said, his name almost came to me. I said, I don't think I'm meant to be a minister. He goes, I've been waiting for this call. And I said, didn't you tell me that Phil Reed on KNX News Radio, the sister station to KNX FM, goes to our church? He said, yeah. I said, could you set me up for lunch with him? Had lunch with him. Within a couple of weeks, I was up visiting KNX FM.
That's a great story.
And it could be anything. It could be meeting Scott Pedersen and asking, can I pull cables around backstage at a concert? Maybe you'll be the director for the Dave Koz cruise at some point in time.
I started in radio because I moved to San Diego from Washington by myself, and I was going to try all the radio stations Monday, TV stations Tuesday, advertising agencies Wednesday, and Thursday I didn't have a plan. And the first place I called was KIFM. So that's how I started, and I was there 15 years. So that's how I started my career. I don't know if
Also, Janet became the #1 salesperson at the radio station.
Yes, and it was all men at the time. There were no female salespeople, and so I was very determined to break that glass ceiling. So yeah, it was a great job. And my mentor was Bruce Walton, who Art actually mentioned, and he was a former Dallas Cowboy football player, and he was the best boss you could ever want. Great mentor. And Art, I don't know if my favorite part about this interview is that you first originally had planned to be a minister or that you played the cello. I'm gonna have to think about those.
Actually, one thing what you just said, I'm reading this book, this biography. No, it's by him. This guy that's just retired is the #1 hockey announcer for NBC. He talks about when he was trying to get a broadcasting job, play-by-play, and how many stations he walked into and told him no. This guy just retired as the most legendary hockey announcer in the NHL. And I'm reading about how many radio stations and teams told him no originally. I still remember the first radio station that said, no, we're not going to hire you. I've attempted it's up in the Cascade River, up in the Columbia River, east of Portland. I've attempted to walk in someday and go, can I have a job? Let me show you my resume now.
I think I know of the guy you're talking about, and I would kind of venture to say you are already legendary because you're worldwide. And so I want to ask you the last question, and then I have something where I want to see if you'll do for us. But my last question is, how do you see being a festival producer and host evolving over the next 10 years?
Well, first we have to get through this pandemic. The radio show can keep going simply because it's so easy to do. The festival, the jazz festival, I thought was going to crash and burn when Smooth Jazz Radio's ratings went down and we lost all the big markets because the demographic got 55 years plus and advertisers don't want 55 years plus. But what I found was that people who like a form of music from age 30 to age 60 aren't going to change their tastes. Everyone remembers points in their lives by the songs they were listening to at that moment in time. And then I thought, okay, when our audience starts retiring, that'll kill the festival and we'll just have to wind it down. But I found that people, as they retired, had been wanting to come to this festival for 20, 30 years. They had it on their bucket list. So we grew as people retired. So now it's just a matter of, I'd like 5 more years. If I can get 10 more years, that's great. And you know that the venue is phenomenal. I mean, on an island.
If anyone can make it over there, it's an experience that like no other, for sure.
Janet's husband asked her to marry him on a small boat off of the other side of Catalina Island, and he almost dropped the engagement ring in the Pacific Ocean.
That is a true story. And then Art announced it on his radio show that night. It's a great story. So so here's my request, Art. So Art's voice, his radio voice is definitely known around the world, and there are women that swoon when they hear it. And so Art, I want to know if you can lean into the microphone and do a little bit of your famous voice coming into a set on the radio and introducing an artist, and maybe talking a little bit about just doing a little bit of what you would do on your show for us, a special treat.
Well, you know, if you ask LeBron James to hit this 3-pointer, he probably can't even hit the buckets. But the other people do me much better than I do me. But it was
Come on.
It was lights out, Cindy. Lights out. Now it's time for David Sanborn. And the reason why my voice sounded so good was because then David Sanborn started playing a great song. I'm not going to have a great voice if a great song doesn't follow. So my voice was great because I had a great song before I started talking, and I had a great song following when I stopped talking.
No, it's the voice.
Well, they can still listen to it. It's streaming on JazzTrax.com.
Yeah, tell them what the website is so they can.
JazzTrax, and Trax is with an X. Jazz, JazzTrax.com.
All right. Rochelle, did you have a question? I saw you unmuted yourself.
Oh, I just wanted to say what an amazing festival, jazz festival is. I've been there a few times. I actually used to work for Young's Market. So I want to say thank you, because it was an amazing time for me to sell my product to the island because it was so busy.
I remember that.
That's so great, Rochelle. I love it that you've been there.
Oops, sorry, hold on.
I've been to Catalina Island also.
Oh, you have, Ashley.
Yes, I've been with Casa.
It's a great place to visit, and the festival's wonderful there.
Yeah.
It's so cool. We went on a Jeep tour.
It's really neat. Anyone else have any questions for Art?
Let's see, I think Tiffany had another question. Did you have another question, Tiffany?
Your favorite music?
What's your favorite music, Art?
I'm going to guess it's jazz.
No, like I said, my favorite is silence.
Of course.
Music is work.
Like for me, watch it on. I love the sound of wind.
All right. Then let's see. I'm just looking to see who's unmuted themselves as a sign of having another question. I think, does anybody, Courtney, did you have a question?
Yes. Do you have a favorite artist?
There's an artist named Joe Sample.
Ah, yeah.
Theaters back in 1960, and he was so famous for his music and his piano playing that he went on tour with the Captain, and got to play a baseball game. My son and I went to a Houston Astros baseball game. Maybe 2 years old and didn't understand that now Joe's gone, and my son, as a 21-year-old, went out to
Whoops. So Art, we can't really hear you. Put your hands down.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. All right. So we got 3 minutes left. So were there any other questions?
I just wanted to say hi to Courtney. Hi, Courtney, it's Ashley.
Hi, Ashley.
How are you?
I'm good.
I just wanted to say hi, see how you're doing. I haven't talked to you in a while. I hope we get to meet face to face soon.
Yeah, maybe one day.
Okay, nice talking to you.
Yep.
All right, everybody. Thank you very much, everybody. Oh, it looks like Tiffany, you just unmuted yourself. Did you want one last question, Tiffany?
Hi, Cece.
Oh, saying hi to Cece.
Hi, Tiffany.
What question can I ask?
Any question you'd like? Do you ask him, do you enjoy your job?
Do you enjoy your job?
Definitely.
Yeah, he certainly does.
Yeah, you said yes.
Cece.
Everyone should enjoy their job because jobs are really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Art, thank you so much. It's been great to see you and to catch up, and thank you for your time. And it's been really neat talking to you and getting to know you. I thought I knew you pretty well. I've learned some really neat things about you. So it's been really fun, and we really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming and giving us so much information about a job that not many people know a lot about. So this has been very, very interesting. So thank you very much, Art. Everybody can wave goodbye if your screen
Thank you, Art.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Okay, I'm going to
Bye.
start the recording.